Hello, welcome. We are talking politics and religion without killing each other. I am your host, Corey Nathan. It's an honor to be a part of the Democracy Group. That's a network of podcasts that examines what's broken in our democracy, how we can work together to fix it. Let's get right to it. I am so happy to be joined today by Dr. Beth Allison Barr. Dr. Beth Allison Barr is the James Vardaman Endowed Professor of History at Baylor University, where she specializes in medieval history, women's history, and church history. She is the best-selling author of The Making of Biblical Womanhood, How the Subjugation of Women Became Gospel Truth, as well as the recently released Becoming the Pastor's Wife, How Marriage Replaced Ordination as a Woman's Path to Ministry, which we'll discuss today. Her work has been featured by NPR and The New Yorker, and she has written for Christianity Today, The Washington Post, the Dallas Morning News, Sojourners, and Baptist News. You know what I noticed, Baptist News Global, what I noticed about the publications and where you showed up is that there's a pretty broad range. I mean, just from Sojourners to Baptist News, so you're able to hang in pretty diverse places.
Yes, yeah, I have. And now I've actually had several reviews and some writing come out in the UK recently too. And so it's been fun to kind of go international.
I
So,
would imagine that you spent so much time there over the last 25 years or so
yeah.
that they're starting to adopt you as their own.
It is nice to have friends.
Ah, that's great.
So,
That's awesome. You know, one of the things I wanted to start with, at the very, very end of the new book of
mhm.
Becoming the Pastor's Wife, you made a reference when you were thanking your kids to a faith. I forget exactly how you worded it, but a faith stronger than your own at their age. I was curious if you mentioned in another interview I was listening
Yeah.
to that there was never a time that you didn't know Christ. Was there a time when you struggled or when you had more questions than answers or that maybe your faith wasn't as strong?
Yeah, certainly. I would say that because I grew up in such a Bible-oriented town, everyone I knew went to church.
Yeah.
I really didn't know people who didn't go to church. And so I think it wasn't until much later that I began to ask questions like, hey, actually, not everyone does believe this. What do I do with that? What do I do with these objections to my faith, et cetera? And so that didn't come until much later for me, I think in college and even a little after college, whereas my kids have grown up in a world where they have been confronted much earlier with questions and seen even the problems of Christianity and understood the differences between different denominations in a way that I don't think I was really all that familiar with. And they have both moved forward, as I said, in much more consciously Christian ways
Yeah.
than I think, at the time when I was their age, it was what everyone did.
Right.
But they have already made choices in that
That's
direction.
That's interesting. I mean, you would think that I would process this through. My kids are 24, 22, and 20. I think your oldest is about the age of my
Yeah,
youngest,
my oldest is 21.
and then
My
your little
youngest is 15.
yeah. So I mean, think about the last 10 years, not
Yeah,
just in terms of our politics, but what the politics intertwined with American Christianity.
absolutely.
So
Yeah,
they're very
absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I try not to tell parts of their lives that they may not want shared. But I remember being really, really proud of my son when he made a conscious decision his first year of college that he was he was going to move towards a Christianity that really reflected the gospel of Christ. And he became very involved with what an organization in Waco called Mission Waco and
Mm,
Church Under the Bridge, which is an intentional group that reaches out to the homeless. It's actually a pretty famous organization. It's been around for a long time. Jimmy Dorrell is the director of it, and anyway, he is extremely involved in that group that and spends a lot of his time actually working with the unhoused and with children in low income apartment complexes, and it's all on his own time. And
Mm.
so I'm just, I'm really proud that he recognized that early on, that there was a difference between going to church and acting like Jesus.
Yeah. That's really profound actually and really encouraging. There's something about really uh, absorbing the ministry of Jesus and then trying to reflect that in the world, trying to
Yeah.
be, that the hands and the feet, if you will, to use a worn out expression.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he was at a college, sort of a campus revival sort of thing. And he just sort of had this moment where everyone around him, he was just like, what in the world are we doing? How is anything that's going on here really mattering for the kingdom of God? And he just walked out.
Oh
And that
man.
next week, he went to church under the bridge and just kind of like, I mean, it was, yeah, and I was thinking, you know what? I don't think I would have done that at his age. I think I would have just kept going with all my friends.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. There's definitely something to be said for that. Now, I'm thinking about about the Beth at that age, maybe late teens, early 20s. And it seems like, and maybe I've heard you say this, but you've had an affinity or sensitivity for justice.
oh
Uh,
yeah.
so maybe you're not giving yourself at that age enough credit.
Well, yeah. I mean, I always have, but I would say the justice that I was oriented towards at that time was more like when I saw people being mistreated at
Mm,
church and like, I mean, among my friend group and things like that. Or people, I would stand up for that. I was very, but I don't know if I would have seen it on a larger scale. Like there is actually a serious problem in the modern Christian church where most of us go. I don't know if I would have recognized that. And so maybe that's what it is. It's that bigger scale.
yeah. It's interesting you bring that up because when I first started prepping for this conversation, I thought that we could just focus on the book. Yeah, but a lot's happened.
A lot has happened. Yeah.
I guess my big question is how are you holding up?
Some days are better than others. I history really helps. Being a historian really helps because even though what's going on with us in the US right now is culturally distinctive,
Mm,
and there are things, this has never happened before. Yet at the same time, similar things have happened before.
yeah,
And, democracy is a fragile thing. It's always been a fragile thing. And the US has held on to it for a really extraordinary amount of time. And historically speaking, it's not surprising.
yeah.
Um, and so, I think, and the thing too with history, I think, is that I was thinking about this the other day. I was like, you know what? People have always lived through really challenging times and they've still found joy. And they've still found joy. It's still worth it. It's still worth it. There's beautiful things in life. Being a person of faith, um, I do believe that God is with us, and I can see people who have held that faith throughout history, and so I think that that's where I find encouragement. I am very concerned about
Mm,
what's happening right here, and I've had moments where I've thought maybe I should apply outside of country, go find, I do have lots of friends. I have, but then I think about it and I'm like, but this is my home. This
yeah,
is not everyone can leave. I mean, what happens to the people who can't leave? Who's going to stay here and fight for a country that I really do believe in? And so, so it's so it's hard, but it's really hard for me to lose hope entirely. And I think the next few years are going to be very challenging.
yeah. I really appreciate the way that you put that. I want to quote something you said on Marginalia, your Substack.
Sure.
And by the way, I'll link it's a really great Substack. The only thing is I'm greedy. I want more.
Sorry, I know.
That's
I kind of have to. I have this. so I'm a person who I carry around a lot of like guilt. I'm like, oh, I really should be doing this. I really
No,
should be doing this. And I've kind of had to come to peace at it with like marginalia. I'm like, you know what?
just do
This
your
really
thing.
is on my own time. And also, I don't want to write when I don't just want to put out
Yeah.
content. I've
Yeah.
really come, I'm like, I want to put out stuff that matters and that is helpful. And so that's mostly what I do. I will tell you, I have about 20 unfinished posts.
I do too. I have these open tabs. That's
Yeah,
so
I have
funny.
about, and maybe one day I'll go back and finish some of them.
Yeah, it's okay. Well, I was going to quote something you said in early July that helps for this moment. It's about perspective. You said, "For me, this place bridges past and present, bringing together who I am as a woman in the church and as a scholar
Mm,
who studies women in the church, who I am as a modern Christian who believes in the same God as the medieval Christians who once worshiped in this place." I really
yeah.
appreciate that perspective when you talk about what you just said. This is my home. I
Hmm.
wonder, there are times when I just want to say, you know what? Take the word evangelical. You can have it. If that's what evangelical means, I don't want it. Does that ever cross it? Like, to the
Oh,
same
yeah.
thought that says, let me just go to the UK or
Yeah.
wherever.
Oh, yeah. I have that thought all the time. And with evangelical too, I honestly don't care if the word evangelical survives. Um,
But
I
but if I may, you're still going to the Southern Baptist Convention.
Oh, well, yeah, but that's only as an observer. I'm not Southern
Okay.
Baptist.
Okay. Wait, Texas Baptist or something
I'm
like that?
Texas Baptist.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Our church is Texas Baptist. And while people all the time, they're like, Beth, you're going to end up one day at an Anglican church or something more high church. And I'm like, you just don't really know me. The worship, I love going to different churches and experiencing different things, but
Yeah.
the worship in which I feel most comfortable and the church polity in which I feel most comfortable, is a more democratic congregational space.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I'm very low church, I suppose, in my personal preferences. Plus, my husband is too. I don't think he would.
Yeah, yeah.
He's kind of anyway. But as for what it's called, I don't actually care. I mean, evangelical is just a word we made up and it means different things at different points in time. 18th century evangelicalism is nothing.
Mm.
It's a very different construct than what we talk about evangelicalism today. And so historically, I am not tied to words. I'm tied to a faith,
Interesting.
and that faith is deep.
What first drew you to this line of study, to history as a focus, to women's studies? What first
Yeah.
kind of pointed you in that direction?
So when I was in high school, if we go back to young me, I'm a avid reader. I read everything, absolutely everything. I love fiction, love stories. And I also loved writing. Like I started writing my first novel when I was in fourth grade.
Oh, I have to ask you, since you bring it up, are we going to see historical fiction out of Beth Allison Barr? I mean,
So
please tell
you
me.
know what's really funny? Since I published Becoming the Pastor's Wife, I have that one reference to that book that I started and
Yeah.
never finished. Another book. That's a pattern in my life, by the way. And I have gotten a lot of requests. In fact, I even had a historical fiction author, I won't say who it was, reach out to me and ask if they could take it on and me be a co-author with them.
Oh, wow.
And which I was very flattered, but part of me was also like, you know what, if I'm going to write this, I'm going to write it.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, maybe um I I write because I like writing because
Yeah.
it's fun. I like stories. I like telling them to myself. I like telling them to my students. And so maybe one day,
Yeah.
when I can get the headspace.
Well, you have one pre-subscriber or whatever you want to call it. I'll buy it in advance, and
Thanks.
I
I'll
got to tell
probably
you,
use a pen name if I do historical fiction though.
yeah.
So I'll probably use a pen name.
Yeah. Well, I imagined some my favorite one of my favorite series is Paris the novel, New York the novel, London the
Oh
novel.
yeah.
I forgot his
Yeah.
name. Is it Rutherford or something like that?
Yeah.
But as soon as you made mention of the one that you started, I was, oh man, I would read that in a heartbeat.
I have heard that from so many people. That was, yeah. People were like, you just need to stop everything and write that. And I
Yeah.
was like, we'll see. I also, being in the book world, which I knew nothing about, really, I was academic book world is such a different animal
Yeah.
than trade press. And I was like, I don't know, getting a fiction book published
Yeah.
and
It's a whole
actually having
different,
people read it
yeah.
is like that bar is so high.
Oh
So
man.
part of me also is kind of like, sure, yeah, I can write it. Is anybody going to pick it up and publish it? That's another whole thing. So anyway.
Well, it seems like you have a really awesome research team, Savannah and I forgot their
Oh,
names.
well, yeah, for the becoming the pastor's wife, I worked with two graduate students who were fantastic, Brooke Lefevre,
Okay.
and then also Katie, who's at Notre Dame right now. And then Savannah was an independent. She was actually working at the Bible for Normal People and contacted me about doing a podcast series.
Oh, that's
And that
awesome.
was where All the Buried Women was born.
Okay.
So anyway, Savannah and I are still really good friends.
Oh, that's great.
And yeah,
Well, if I'm cheering you on, but
thank
okay.
you.
So I do want to ask you some tough questions before we get into the book.
Sure.
Um, Last week, when you first heard that Charlie Kirk was shot and ultimately died, how did you process that immediately and then over the course of this last week?
Well, I put out on my threads, and in fact, I haven't been back on threads since then. I may not go back on threads. I don't know. I'm really tired of social media at this point. I put that this was a moment for us all to step back and grieve.
Mm,
And not the loss of life is always tragic. I don't care whose life it is. The loss of life is always tragic, but it's bigger than that because it's the moment of a nation in which this type of tragic, this type of politically motivated killing is a part of our life. It's become a part of our nation's DNA. And even more than that, I think with Kirk's death, I, for the first time in a long time, I felt really afraid.
mm,
And because of what I suspected was going to happen in the aftermath of his death. And that was the blame game, that the really horrific blame game that was going to begin. And this is exactly what we have seen. And that terrified me because, again, looking back at history, these types of assassinations of these types of figures often has led to severe crises
mm.
in nations' history. And I mean, he obviously was not the first death that we've seen lately. We've seen so many horrific deaths, but because of who he was connected with, however you feel about that, it had the potential to set off. I mean, you can think about like, World War One,
Mm.
and sort of, it's not so much that a person died. It's not that people weren't killed. It's just that when a person is connected in a particular way, it can set off patterns. And this death had the potential to set off some really horrific violence.
Yeah.
And I'm still, my most recent Substack, which actually my husband wrote. He wrote it on his Facebook, and I was like, "Can I have that, please?" And it was, sort again this what we have seen with the response to Kirk's death on I don't care what side of the table you're on. This blame and these calls to violence just don't reflect anything that we are called to be as Christians. And it's just terrifying to me that we have moved so far away from who Jesus is that we don't realize how much our rhetoric and our inclinations have become so untethered
Yeah.
from the Jesus of the Gospels.
You know, what's interesting. I must follow your husband's independently because
Do you?
I think I do actually because
Uh,
I was so glad to see his thing in my feed last week. It was the part that I remember is it was and forgive me for not quoting it directly, but I think you did quote you did share it in your
I
Substack,
did.
right?
I shared it in my Substack.
So
Yeah.
I recognize it. I'm like, I know this guy. So
He probably did it on Facebook. Yeah, he writes on Facebook. That's kind of where he stays.
what I
Hmm.
appreciated it was the comparison, and he did it much more eloquently than I am going to right now. But it's basically this is who we are, but this is who we're not. And he did about four or five
Yeah, he
bullet
did.
points.
Yep.
It was really it really resonated with me.
Yeah.
Gosh, where I'm going to ask where we go from here, but it's really there's any number of roads that we can go.
There's so many possibilities that are kind of like spinning out from this. I'm a sci-fi fan, and so I'm kind of thinking of Doctor Strange wasn't my favorite movie, but in the Marvel universe. But you can kind of think about all of these different paths that lead out, and very few of them lead to a more peaceful, stable nation. And
Oh man.
that's a really scary place, I think, to be. And I don't say that to scare people or be a scaremonger. It's just a harsh reality, and we've got to change some things to pull this back. And and the first thing is we've got to figure out how to talk to each other across the table.
Yeah.
That's the first thing. And we have to, and the second, well, maybe the first thing we have to do is to stop listening to news that isn't based on evidence.
Right. Right. No, absolutely. I guess the job number one is controlling my own impulses.
Yeah.
You know, I find that I want to show up in spaces where I'm a little bit alien, which is kind of comfortable for me. I grew up in a very observant Jewish family before
Yeah.
becoming a Christian about 25 years ago. So even though I was and I live in the valley where John MacArthur his
Oh,
so I live in Santa Clarita Valley where Masters College is, or Masters
oh
University, I guess they
my.
call it.
Yeah.
So that church
Yeah.
that I was going to, talk about low church. I mean, it is a Johnny Mac church, right?
I'm not that low church.
Man. Um, so I always feel like I'm a Christian. I believe the whole Jesus thing, right? But I'm a Christian with a thick Yiddish accent, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I want to continue showing up there. And a lot of times I'll hear things, I'll see things where, I want to strike back. But then again, I want to do the comparison of this is who we are versus this is who we are not, the way
Right.
Jeb kind of outlined. And I
Yeah.
want to continue being that. At the same time, I got to give myself grace too, because I'm going to lose it.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm just going to, man, I'm just going to snap back and just hope that whoever it is I'm engaging with gives me some grace and give myself some grace,
Yeah.
you know?
No,
So,
it is. It's a hard place to be right now. I think it's really hard when we see people that we love, who simply are saying things that we see are so destructive,
yeah,
and it's like, how do we respond to that without it becoming a yelling match?
yeah,
Um, when people are saying things that are like so out of bounds. Like I read something even this morning on it was somebody who was talking about replacement theory as if this was a fact that Democrats were trying to bring in the immigrant people to take over the political game. And I'm like, do you even hear yourself?
right.
Do you even is there, do you have any evidence for this? I mean, and it's hard. It's like, where do you step in and speak when you see things that are so crazy?
You're right.
Or when do you just be like, okay, I can't change this person.
Yeah,
So what can I do that actually might be constructive?
right, right. Yeah, and that's a constant learning process, and sometimes a painful learning process. So Speaking of
Yeah.
Johnny Mac, he passed away a couple months ago. James Dobson passed away last month. How are you processing that?
Yeah, well, I actually wrote an op-ed. I was in England at the time, and the Dallas Morning News reached out to me and they said, "How would you feel about writing an op-ed on James Dobson?" So I actually ended up writing one on him. I, you know, James Dobson and John MacArthur have done so much damage. I
Yeah.
mean, there's no other way to say it. They've done so much damage. And one of the things that I don't want to say it's the most damaging thing they've done, but one of the things that they help to make a constant part of the evangelical narrative is setting up these father figures
Yeah.
who have all the answers, who are right, who are the godly men who everyone should look to, and they're going to tell us what to do. And so they help to create a myth, really this myth in evangelical world that there are these people who have it all right
Mm.
and that we can look up to them and they're going to tell us what to do. And I mean, that's what people do with John MacArthur. That's what, I know a pastor, it's crazy because he's a Protestant pastor and he has like this little shrine of John MacArthur in his office.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, I mean, I have things from Catholic shrines that I travel to that, because it's like little things that I
But
bring back from the travels. But I mean, it's like, I don't actually think that they're important in that sort of like, really, it's not like this is a person that I am looking up to or looking to for spiritual guidance.
right.
And that's what people do with John MacArthur and with James Dobson. And James Dobson, I think I wrote this in my op-ed, he was the Christian guru. And I use that word specifically. He was the Christian guru of how to make a Christian family. And so he was the one that everybody went to figure out what to do with their family. And they followed his advice,
Mm.
no matter what it was.
Right.
And that's, terrifying. And when we look at politics today, I mean, that's exactly what we see. We see people following the advice of certain mostly men, no matter how unqualified they are, because we have decided that they represent this Christian ideal, or they're going to help bring us to this Christian promised land. And so therefore, whatever they say, we're going to follow.
Yeah. It's interesting you put it that way, father figures, guru. When I first became a Christian, I needed to be able to make a ready defense for the hope that's within me.
Yeah.
So naturally, actually, before I even became a Christian, I was introduced to Ravi Zacharias' work.
Yep.
And I ultimately became friends. He mentored me.
Oh, wow.
So I was sort of preconditioned when he passed, actually after he passed away, when all the information came
Yeah.
out, for this level of just kind of grappling
Yeah.
with what does this mean for my faith? What does this mean for my theological foundations? And I would say that a lot of the secondary, tertiary sort of accoutrement that go along with
Hmm.
it maybe is a lot more shaky ground. And especially because the church I was going to was Johnny Mac Church, and some of the things that have
Yeah.
come out about him, even when he was still alive.
Yep.
But I keep on looking at Jesus, like
Yeah. That's
like
exactly.
that. It doesn't change it doesn't change the word. That's what I appreciate. Actually, one of the things I really appreciate about the way you go about your work is that you just like, all right, let's keep reading. What else does Scripture say? You
Yeah.
know. So actually, maybe that's a good way to kind of tee you up.
Sure.
Becoming the pastor's wife. And again, the subtitle should be restated: How Marriage Replaced Ordination as a Woman's Path to Ministry. What what inspired you? Actually, yeah, let's do that first. What
Yeah.
inspired you to do? I mean, this is kind of a big. You're tackling something big here. You had to know, right?
Yeah, I did. So this book would not have existed if I hadn't written The Making of Biblical Womanhood. This
Okay.
clearly is a project that followed The Making of Biblical Womanhood. And when I finally got my head wrapped around after The Making of Biblical Womanhood, and I thought maybe I can write something again. A lot of people were clamoring for me to write about the pastor's wife. And at first I was like, I just don't want to write a memoir. I'm like, I don't really care about that. I don't care about just writing. I'm like, I don't see a lot of historical interest here yet. And I was at the same time, I was teaching a graduate course and I was had assigned one of my colleagues' books. Her name's Betsy Flowers, Elizabeth Flowers, and she has this great book called Into the Pulpit: Women in Power in Southern Baptist Women in Power in the Post-World War II era. And in it, she was talking about the rise of the conservative resurgence within the Southern Baptist Convention, which I talk about a lot in
Yeah.
Becoming a Pastor's Wife. And it's the rise of the conservative takeover. And essentially, the Southern Baptist world we see today is a direct product of the Southern Baptist conservative resurgence. And she was talking about how some of the loudest voices for the conservative resurgence were pastors' wives who were also loudly declaiming the evils of female ordination. So
Mm,
you have these women in ministry who are fighting against women in ministry. And that caught my attention. And I thought, is there a connection here that nobody has ever really followed before about how the emergence of the pastor's wife role historically connects to the decline of women's ordination within evangelical churches?
yeah.
And that was my starting question. And it was a question. I didn't know the answer. And so this book was a deep dive historically on women's ordination, which is really what, in some ways, the subtitle gets at that, and how it connects to the emergence of the pastor's wife role in really the 20th century.
Right, right. I'd love to set the table because you not only make a scriptural case for women, not just in ministry, but in
Yeah.
leadership, but also the historical precedent for it. Could you help contextualize that for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So the short answer is that everything that we see men doing in history that we would consider to be an ordained pastoral role, women have also done. And not only have women done it, but there have been male supporters in churches who have supported them, who have seen nothing wrong with women serving in these types of roles.
Yeah,
So the argument that ordination is a new idea within historic Christianity, especially Orthodox, and that's Orthodox with a little o, as in Nicene Creed Christianity, that the ordination of women is a product of the 1960s feminist movement is just absolutely false.
mm,
And that's really what I was trying to get at, to show in this book that it's not just a matter of reinterpreting verses or thinking through why we've decided a small handful of verses apply to all women in all times and all places. It's not just a matter of that. It's a matter of two of how have women served in ministry and been supported in ministry throughout church history. And, I steal the words of Nije Gupta all the time from Tell Her Story, in which he says, everything that men did, women did in the early church.
yeah. So in the process of studying the history, your
Hmm.
vocation, but as well as really taking scripture seriously,
Yeah.
did you find yourself questioning other, I don't know how to put it, but like in our in this moment in time, there seem to be political obsessions,
Yeah.
socio-political Did you find yourself then questioning other
Oh,
of these?
absolutely.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, I don't know if it's questioning. It's more, as a historian, my historian brain serves me really well
yeah,
because I'm able to be like, okay, the way we do church today is a product of a particular historical circumstance that is completely divorced from the Bible. I don't care how you try to do it. Church today looks
right.
nothing like the biblical church. That doesn't mean it's right or wrong.
Well, that's because they were Jewish. They were my homies.
That's exactly right. It looks nothing, and it's not right or wrong. It's not saying that the way we do church today is wrong because it doesn't look like the Bible. It's like how can we recreate an experience in a culture that has been gone for 2000 years?
Right.
We can't. There's no reason to try to do that. And so many things, like even the pastor. I mean, I'm married to a pastor, still am married to a pastor. Um, the pastor role is a new creation. Honestly, I think probably, somebody told me they were like, if you call a book Becoming the Pastor's Wife, people aren't going to read it because nobody thinks pastors' wives are important. Now, that of course made me upset anyway, because I'm like, women are just as important as men. If I titled the book, they wanted me to do like Becoming the Pastor and showing how that connected, because in some ways my argument about the pastor's wife holds true to the pastor.
Mm,
The pastor role today is not a biblically grounded role. It is, the word pastor. I think it's only. I'm not a New Testament person, so I'm always relying on my friends. But I think there's only, and I cited this correctly in the book. I just don't
yeah.
remember. I think there's only one
Okay.
usage of that word in the sense of applying to a position in the church.
Right.
Maybe two, but it's not even still tied to an office. It's actually a gifting. It's a spirit, it's like something, it's not a position that people hold. It's like what people are doing, I suppose, in the church. And the word means shepherding.
Mm,
And that is actually what it's usually how people are acting. you know,
right.
it's not a specific position. And if we look in the early church, I mean, this is part of our whole argument about, I see people all the time that say there's no female pastors in the Bible. And I'm like, there's no male pastors in the Bible either. Yeah, they're not there. What there are is people who are serving in a whole variety of functions.
Right.
And
Teachers, apostles,
yes,
deacons. Yeah.
yes. And then when we look at that, what we see is that there are named women in the Bible serving all of those positions too. In fact, the only named deacon tied specifically to a church, we can think about like Stephen, et cetera, the first deacons, they're not tied to a specific church. They're actually part coming out of the early disciples, like trying to figure out how to solve some problems. The first named deacon tied to a specific, what we would consider to be church community, is Phoebe.
Phoebe. Right. Right.
She's
Right.
the only named deacon
Right.
tied to a specific church community.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it is. And it helps us to kind of like move our brains, be like, oh, and it's like, well, and what else do you think she was doing? I mean, she's with Paul. She's working on Romans with Paul. And this is something else I think, our question, as you said it, when we think about authorship in the Bible, we think about single person authorship. That's the way that our brains function today. That is not the way people's brains functioned in the ancient world, in the
Hmm.
medieval world, really not up until the end of the early modern world, when we start moving into what we would call the Enlightenment era, which I don't like that term, but nonetheless, that's when we can start thinking about people getting more concerned about authorship and citing people. This is where we see footnotes being born,
Right.
et cetera. Before that, people worked together,
Have
you
you
know.
have you ever read any Talmud?
Yes, I have.
Okay,
And
so
Midrash, yes, indeed.
that's a great. I think it's a record. Parts of it are recordings, and you probably know more about it than I do, just from a literary and historical standpoint. But it strikes me that we are brought into those rooms, and not only do we have rabbis and
Yes,
students at a table working all this stuff out, they're doing it across generations, and that's what's recorded
absolutely.
in Talmud. So maybe that's kind of the
Yes,
context that you're
that's
talking
that
about.
is. It is the context. And all of the early writers of the Bible were from that Jewish world.
Yeah.
And and you can even see this, like, I tell people all the time, like with Jerome, who we know, who wrote the Vulgate, translated the Bible into Latin. We call him the translated the Bible into Latin, which became the most common biblical text used in the medieval world. But he did not do this by himself. He actually had a community of women that he was in conversation with, who helped him translate, who they translated the Bible together. And we know this because Jerome tells us this in his letters.
Interesting. For
And
some reason, I'm thinking of the movie Yentl. Did you ever see that?
I did not. I
Oh,
did
it's
not.
totally worth it
Yeah.
because it actually I think you'd really appreciate it. It's Yentl is the Barbara Streisand character, and
Oh,
she has to basically disguise as a man because she's so passionate about Torah and wants to study Torah, but she had to be in a man's world, so
I've
she had to
never
disguise
seen
herself
this.
as
I will have to
that.
look it up.
Oh man, it's such, but you get a
Yeah.
really good taste of where my grandparents and great grandparents' generation came from, the shtetl and studying Torah. And it's very much in the spirit of what's been happening now for thousands of years.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so, and so we get all, I mean, the fact is that probably Phoebe, when she is entrusted to take Romans back to Rome by Paul, she probably is entrusted with it because she was working on it with Paul and she
Mm,
understood the theology that was in it. And so she is the one entrusted to take it back to read out loud to the church. I mean, so in some ways, she's preaching the Bible. She's preaching, this letter that she was part of. And so, I mean, it just, so much of our misunderstandings about women's roles in the Bible are because we are looking at them from our own perspective, our modern day perspective, instead of really trying to, if I can use the word, have empathy and to get into what it was really like to live in that first century space.
yeah.
And if we just did that, it would clear up so much stuff.
Have you ever had a conversation with, I don't know if you'd have a conversation with Al Mullers of the world or Paige, what's his name? Paige,
Patterson.
yeah, or anybody in their orbit. My question would be, what are you afraid of? Like, what
Yep.
you know, like I don't know how to word it, but it's like, what are you afraid of losing? Like, what's the problem here?
Oh, I can tell you what they're afraid of losing. They're
Okay.
afraid of losing their positions. I mean, they have built an entire world that says women can't be in leadership. They have built, the Southern Baptist Convention since the 70s have been arguing this. The Council for Biblical Manhood and Womanhood, the only reason it exists is to do this. So literally they would be without of their jobs. And and also they have built up such fierce rhetoric around this. I mean, Al Mohler's whole stick is if you accept women in ministry, then you don't believe the Bible. This is what
Mm,
he has been. So if he goes back on that, he's saying by his own words, he doesn't believe the Bible. I mean, he has backed himself into a corner that I mean, he can get out of it, but he can only get out of it by going against every single thing that he's been teaching. And, as I said, I mean, he's built this world by saying that only people who don't believe the Bible would support women in ministry.
wow. I was so startled. I was listening to, it must have been the podcast that you're talking about,
All the buried women.
All the Buried Women. I was so
Yeah.
startled. I think it was the same episode where you were talking about Maria.
Yeah. The last
Um,
episode.
yeah. And where Rick Warren's microphone was cut off,
Oh, yeah.
as if what he was
Absolutely.
saying was so dangerous, you
Yep.
know?
Yeah.
It's,
And yeah, it was. And that's been a common part of the Southern Baptist Convention proceedings. That's what they did to women in the 70s. That when they got up to speak, and in the 80s when they got up to speak on these issues, and up through the 2000s, I mean, they would literally turn off their microphones
mm,
so that they couldn't be heard. Which I think says, I mean, we're in all sorts of conversations like about gerrymandering
yeah.
in states. And, this is this whole thing about silencing people. It's because you are afraid of what will happen if people are really able to speak and be heard.
Yeah. Now, this also hits close to home for you because you're married. How should I? What's the proper way to say it? You're married to a pastor, but you're not a pastor. I don't know. Like,
Yeah, well, I mean, I sort of tongue in cheek embrace the term pastor's wife,
yeah,
just because that's the way that's the way I've been referenced
yeah.
for forever. And I usually don't correct people. There was a pastor in North Carolina who tried to call me Sister Beth, and I said no. I said, I will not be Sister Beth. I'm so sorry.
Oh
No.
man.
But anyway, but I've always been referenced as a pastor's wife. Um,
There
but
are
what was your question again?
Well,
Sorry.
there are a number of, this is sort of a side conversation, but there's a number of references that you make that I'm like cringing for you.
Oh yeah.
You know? So there was one that you talked about. Actually, it wasn't your experience. Oh no, it was your experience where someone reached out to you and with a question about childcare, and you're like, there's a pastor
Yep.
who does that, and the pastor says, take care of it yourself. So,
Exactly
like,
right.
how did you not punch him in the throat?
I was really angry. I was really angry. And I like took it. I did. I took it to my husband and I was like, I don't know what you and I think my husband like stepped in for me,
Okay.
like to kind of do this. But I was really um I mean, it was one of those moments where I felt anger
Yeah.
because I was like, this is not my job. I was tenure track at the time. I had two small kids. I was, doing all of this other stuff. And I was like, what the heck? This is your full-time job. I'm
Yeah.
like, what do you think I am?
Yeah.
And that, I think that was one of those where I really began to understand how much women are devalued in evangelical churches.
Okay, so I'm going to ask your advice here, if you don't
Hmm.
mind, and feel free to just like, no, that's not my position. Yeah, but so we've had these incredible women, including you, on this program,
Yeah.
and I can set my watch to. We had Rabbi Sharon Brous, who I happened to see last night. She's incredible. We had Bishop Marion Edgar Buddy,
Oh,
we've
yeah.
just had these
Yeah.
wonderful people on the show. I could set my watch to it that somebody from church or the Bible study we went to for about a decade is going to be like, well, the whole the women in leadership thing, or some reference to like, what are you doing putting her on the show? She's not
Yeah.
supposed. So how do you, if it's somebody that I've had to relate, like somebody I was in a Bible study with, had a like a Dobsonian sort of how to raise your kids type of Bible study for a decade plus, how do you respond to someone that's the first thing out of their pie hole?
Yeah. So it does depend on the relationship that I have with them. And so sometimes I find this as a teacher, the best thing to do is just to ask questions, be like, why? Why don't you think they should be on there? Why do you think a woman shouldn't be doing that position? And what that does is it puts it back on them
Right.
it makes them go on the defensive
It
instead
opens
of,
up their own assumptions. Yeah, that's
yep,
what Jesus did a lot. A lot of
yep.
questions as answers to questions.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so that's one of the things I do. I'll do that. I'll be like, why? Why shouldn't women do that? And I do that with students too. I do it much more kindly with
Okay.
students because students are genuinely learning.
Yeah.
And they're in a place where they're learning. And a lot of the assumptions they carry are often those that have been taught to them by their parents.
Mm, that
And
makes
so,
sense.
yeah, and so it's like they're genuinely um so I mean, yeah, so there's no reason to as I said, I'm much kinder. I'm very kind with students. But to sometimes to other people, I don't want to say I'm unkind, but I will be more direct. For a student, for example, I'd be like, okay, let's talk about that. Who else thinks this? And that
Yeah.
way it's not. And then we'll be like, let's talk about why do you think this? And then it kind of opens it up and it takes the pressure off of a single person. Somebody who is maybe a friend or in the church or somebody on social media, I'll be more direct. I'll be like, why? Why do you think that? Do you realize how demeaning that is
Yeah.
when you say it that way towards women, what you are implying about women, that women are worthless. So
Mm,
it depends. I guess it's a graded scale of
right.
how I deal with that question depending on who the person is.
And I guess you just have to accept that you'll have different levels of um, impact,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. And if it's a colleague of mine at
Okay.
Baylor, and especially if it is directed towards another woman, that is where you will probably see me at my least kind.
Mm, yeah.
So,
So I don't want to give away the whole book, but I do want to we started to touch on this earlier. You ask a really great question. Is biblical authority really the reason behind the different ways we categorize women who do pastoral work?
Yeah,
So, could we go a little bit more into depth on that?
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So, the question that I challenge throughout the book, and I think, really in some ways every chapter does this, is challenging what we think about the work that women are doing and what type of work is it. And almost, really what women are doing is the same type of work as men. Everywhere in, I could say this historically, all places, all times, the work women are doing is fundamentally the same as men. It's just that we are calling it different things. And so the question, of course, is why?
Yeah.
Why are we calling it different things?
Yeah.
Usually it comes down to power, position, and paychecks.
Mm,
That's what it comes down to. And so
man.
women is called in a way that they have less power. They have unofficial or part-time positions, which means that they have lower paychecks, sometimes often no paychecks. A very striking example of this is an article published by Christianity Today, I think 3 or 4 years ago now, in which Lifeway, which is the publishing branch of the Southern Baptist Convention, did a survey of women in ministry in Southern Baptist and Southern Baptist-like churches. And what they found is that women serving in essentially official ministry roles or doing official ministry jobs for churches, more than 80% of them were part-time or volunteer. So either not paid at all for what they were doing or only paid very minimally and not given, full positions on staff, even though they were doing full-time work. And I think this just really just slaps us in the face how much we devalue women's work. And so the question is, why do we do this? And what, if you are in an evangelical church, the answer that people will most often come back with is 1 Timothy 2 or 1 Corinthians 14 or wives submit to your husbands,
Right.
as in the household codes. That's it. Those are the passages that are slapped back on women. And
Right.
so it's this idea that the reason we devalue women is because the Bible devalues women. Because the Bible says that women's authority, women's words are not as valuable as men's words, that women are to be silent where only men can speak publicly and with authority. And so the question is, okay, does the Bible really say that? And when we look at the Bible, when we look at the entirety of the Bible, this is an unsustainable argument. In fact, what we see more often than not is God going out of his way to make women visible, to make their voices heard,
Right.
women, to make women seen. And we also see, in the New Testament church, we see women serving in every type of named role that men are doing. So even though I totally think that Paul was telling some women in First Timothy, when he's addressing First Timothy 2 and he's addressing the church in Ephesus, he is telling a group of women who are, to sit down and shut up and not teach before they learn. He's telling them that. It's
Right.
not the question. The question is does that apply to all women in all places for all times? And that is an absurd conclusion to draw from a letter written to a specific church context when we see Paul at the same time standing up and supporting women who are teaching and having authority over men, like Phoebe, like all of the women who are mentioned at the end of Romans 16, who includes Phoebe, who also includes Junia, who is named an apostle. It's like, why? So the answer, I would say, does biblical authority support women not serving in leadership roles? I would say the only way you can get to that conclusion is if you egregiously misread scripture and take out these few verses and build your entire theology through these few verses while completely ignoring everything else in the Bible that women are doing.
What is that? There's that phrase, context, pretext. What is it again?
It's so I remember the first person who told this to me was actually Ben Witherington III, who was one of the early people. He wrote his dissertation on women in the church, and I had a conversation with him once, and he was like, "I thought that that would be the end of it." He was like, "I said, of course women can do all these things. Let's look at the Bible." And he's both like, I thought that would be the end of it. And that was back in the early 80s. Clearly not the end of it. But I remember him saying a verse without a context is a pretext to say whatever you want. So a text without a context is a pretext to say whatever you want.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. You arrive at something a priori, like with a already having made up your
Yep.
mind. So
Yep.
you're gonna just like as if the Bible was a piece of glass and you broke it and you took the shards that just, support the case
Absolutely.
you've already arrived at. Um,
Absolutely.
Man,
Yeah.
I've gotten myself into a lot of trouble when I found that to be the case. But sometimes I'm the one who's doing it. That there's a conclusion that I want to arrive at, but then
Yeah.
I'm wrestling. I'm looking at scripture and it's telling me something other than what I want it to say. So I think we have to do it with humility. I have
We
to
have
do it
to
with
be
humility.
honest. Yeah, we have to be honest and we have to be willing. What's more important to figure out what maybe we see God doing in the Bible or to support our modern structures
Yeah.
that we have made that we maintain and have built up on particular readings of the Bible that we might actually be really wrong about.
Well, I mean, we could do this a lot, but I'd give away the whole book, and I want folks to get it. Becoming the
Yeah.
Pastor's Wife. In fact, if folks are watching, there it is,
Yeah, it
and
is.
that's a really cool. I love how the shadow that like there was
Oh
clearly a
my
lot of thought
gosh.
put into that, and
That's my
um,
favorite. I I love that cover. I know that there's a lot of subtle things that go on in the art of
yeah,
writing books that a whole lot of people don't ever get. I think that's the cover. I don't Making a Biblical Womanhood's a pretty good cover too, but I think Becoming the Pastor's Wife captures my thesis,
mm,
in that picture because the shadow is Catherine of Alexandria, who is an early Christian martyr and saint who also became the patron saint of preachers.
oh wow,
And she is, I mean, if you think about that, a woman who is the patron saint of medieval preachers.
that's pretty awesome.
And we have become this idea that women are only to have authority through a domestic role that stands behind their husband.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thesis of my book.
Um,
How far we have come.
Wow. Well, like I said, I feel like I could do this. I was joking before we hit record that, I only take about 7, 8 hours for my interviews, but I feel
Yeah.
like I really could with you. But I won't do that to you. I want to ask you the TP&R question. We've sort of been talking about it
Oh, sure.
already. The TP&R question is, what do you think each of us can do to be able to share space with, have better conversations with, and even nurture relationships with people across our differences? So people they have different backgrounds and beliefs than we do, get their news from different sources than we do. How can we do better at talking politics and religion without killing each other? Or is it even possible?
Yeah, of course it's possible. Every person is made in the image of God. And if we start from that perspective, that
Mm,
every person, and I go around all the time reminding myself of this. I was just in the UK a few weeks ago and I was sitting on the train and I was trying to get some work done and someone came on who had a very loud voice and was really obnoxious. And I just stopped and sat down and was like, this person is made in the image of God.
mm,
And I need to remember that and think about before I respond to them. And I think if we do that, if we're like, God made this person, God loves this person, and and they are just as worthy of the love of God as I am.
yeah. It-
Um, it
yeah.
helps. That helps.
That's a really good reminder. And there are different ways that you can remember. Like, there's been some folks this week. Well, it's kind of an ongoing thing where people are striking out or at me,
Yes.
and I sometimes it
Sure.
just occurs to me that this person is hurting. Like after
Yes.
Charlie's murder, some of my friends and loved ones are big fans of his, so
Yeah.
they're mourning right now. You
They are
know?
indeed. I had that conversation with some people on Instagram who were taking umbrage at something else, and I was like, was like, yeah, you're really hurting right now, aren't you? And they were like, yeah. And I was like, maybe you shouldn't make assumptions about other people because you're really hurting right now and you're projecting that.
Mm.
And they were like, yeah. I was just like, just maybe let's just step back. And I think if we remember, even yes, people are oftentimes when people strike out, more often than not, it's out of a place of hurt.
Yeah.
And I think that helps us. It goes back. It humanizes us because we can all remember times when we strike out because
Yeah.
we were hurt, right or wrong. And it humanized. And I think we've just got to humanize people. We've just got to get to a place where we look at somebody and we don't see Democrat or Republican or Kirk supporter or anything, but we see somebody who's made in the image of God, who is a human just like me.
That's a really good point. Just because if I just see one data point and allow that to be reductive, that's the whole person, because my goal is to see any number of connecting points with that individual.
Yeah,
Whether it's just somebody I'm interacting with online or somebody I'm getting a beer with or whatever it is, like I want to have any number of touch points so that they're a whole human being as opposed to this thing is definitive. You know what I mean?
right. Yep, that's absolutely right. And I think also challenging when we see people doing that to other people, not letting people get away with turning it into those people.
Yeah, them.
But yeah,
That's pernicious. Yeah.
they're not them. They're people created in the image of God, just
Amen.
like you.
Yeah. I got to ask you, how's the new book coming along? I don't want you
Oh,
to give it away or anything, but how's it going?
it's a gift. It's my medieval book, and it's I'm glad I saved it to the end because I feel very free
Oh,
to
that's great.
write. And I'm really looking forward to it.
Oh,
It's
that's
it's
great.
coming along. It's coming along, and I feel good about everything that I'm writing right now. So I'm happy.
Well, you have an open invitation to come back on this program anytime you like, but I'm going to start getting in line right now for when that book comes out because I'm definitely going to want to talk to you again. Before we wrap it up, you get to turn the tables on me. Do you have any
Yeah. Well,
questions for
I'm
me?
curious from the things that you were talking about, what do you see? The question you asked me, what were the pressure points? What are the questions that I see, that the Bible actually doesn't support? What do you see? Because you have this really interesting background where you're from a Jewish background, but you've also been in very probably some of the most conservative evangelical spaces. What are the things that you've had to stop and maybe, for lack of a better word, deconstruct in your own life?
Oh, there's a ton. There's
Give
a
me
ton.
one.
Well, first of all, I mean, James Dobson comes to mind. Johnny Mack
Yeah.
comes to mind. So James Dobson, I was teachable to a fault when I first became a Christian.
Yeah.
So I look back at my kids when we first started having kids in the early 2000s, and I followed that model.
Yeah.
If I had to do it all over again, I would have actually submitted to Lisa, my wife's. Her she has this incredible talent. Seeing her with babies and toddlers,
Yeah.
I would have submitted more to her because that's not my inclination. I think the way
Right.
you put it one time is once you can connect with kids once they can start to see make
Once
connections.
they can actually start thinking, they have this metaphorical shift where
Metaphorical,
they
yeah.
stop thinking literally and can think metaphorically. Yeah.
So I don't connect with kids. I'm like, what's wrong with you, child? And it's so because Lisa is gifted that way, I would have submitted to her as opposed to kind of take that like male leadership model and
Yep.
spare the rod, spoil the child. Like I really regret some of that stuff.
Yeah.
But you know what? My kids are gracious too. Like so I can go to them and say, you know what? I think we did the wrong thing back there, but I love you, and today's a new day, and if you'll allow me, kind of thing. And
That's fantastic.
there's
Yeah.
other stuff with Johnny Mack too, like just getting hung up on male leadership. I
Yep.
remember going into the school where my kids were going, a Christian school where they were going for about 9 or 10 years. There was a woman who got up as like in a position of leadership, and it was like 10 years. How long was I Christian at that point? At least 5 years in,
Hmm.
and it just kind of startled me. Maybe it's because of my own prejudices, right?
Yeah.
I welcomed those assumptions because of my own prejudices.
Yeah.
So it's been a slow process of like looking at those words again, and then
Yeah.
there's some others like there are references, actually similar places where the case is made for male headship, male leadership kind of thing, where the subject of homosexuality is dealt with. But now looking at the original language, that's not the word. The word homosexual didn't exist in first
Yeah.
century Israel. So there's a lot of stuff that I'm starting to look. Now, again, I don't want to go about it in a way that I start with these preferences and then kind of back what I want to. I want to
Right.
go about it in an honest way.
Humility. Humility
Yeah,
is key.
yeah.
That's very true.
I love
And
the way. Sorry, go
yeah.
ahead.
No, no, I was just going to say, I mean, my general rule of thumb in life is that I could be wrong.
Yeah,
And I think that's a good way to approach the Bible is that, I could be wrong. I'm human, I'm fallible, I could be wrong.
yeah. One of my favorite historians that I started reading about 20 years ago, Tom Wright, N.T. Wright
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And in his big books, you could tell that he went about those projects risking the possibility that he'd come out the other side of his history work,
Yep.
shaking the foundation of his faith. But what I found was, especially in the resurrection book, which was really helpful for me, again, my computer keeps on doing the thumbs up thing. Sorry. Is that it's a deeper, more deeply rooted faith that he came out the other side with, and a much more
Right.
nuanced faith, which to me makes a heck of a lot more sense than some of the other stuff I was
Right.
going.
And I think that's the thing too, is that when we really have that posture of humility, it deepens our faith. And,
Yeah,
people are afraid if we ask questions, it's going to make us lose our faith, but that's only if our faith is fragile.
mm,
And if you actually have a faith that can be questioned, that's a much deeper faith.
yeah, yeah. Man, that's a challenging question, Beth. I really appreciate. I'm gonna have to start thinking about that. What?
I'm sorry. I was just curious because I was
No,
like,
that's a
you
great
have a
question.
fascinating background.
Oh, thanks.
So anyway,
Yeah, it's been an interesting ride. But so before we go, how can folks find the new book, find, Marginalia and just all
yeah.
the great work that you're doing? What's the best way to do it?
Yeah, well, Marginalia is on Substack. You can go and look me up. I'm always Beth Allison Barr when I'm on social media. I confess I'm more on Substack and Instagram than any other place.
Okay.
And so if you want to find me, those are the places where you will find me being more active. And, yeah. So,
I'll definitely put the links to Substack and your IG on in the show notes.
mhm.
We definitely covered a bunch, and I could cover a
Yeah,
whole
this
lot
was
more.
fun. This
Is
was
there anything
fun.
important we haven't discussed you'd like to add before we wrap it?
Um, no, I mean, I think, becoming the pastor's wife I tell people that The Making of Biblical Womanhood was a book I knew what I was writing. I knew the story because I'd been teaching it for a long time. Becoming the pastor's wife, sort of like N.T. Wright, was a book I didn't know the answer to when I started
Mm,
writing it. And
that's
and
scary.
it was scary. I didn't know. And
Wow.
it was really fascinating to me how that story moved. And I think people will find my chapter 8
Oh,
very
it's hard.
yeah. I think that book that it was a chapter that I had no idea I was going to write
Mm,
until I found a certain document in the Southern Baptist Convention archives,
yeah.
which took me 8 months to figure out the story.
Yeah.
And anyway, I think that chapter wraps up the book and also provides kind of a wrap up to the Making of Biblical Womanhood really well.
Okay. Well, I definitely commend it. Folks who appreciate history, appreciate faithfulness to Scripture, real faithfulness to Scripture, not convenient faithfulness to Scripture, recent history as well as medieval history. So I think folks will really enjoy becoming the pastor's wife. And I really enjoyed this conversation and getting to know you better, Beth. It's such a
Yeah,
treat.
this was
So
great.
thanks for
Thanks for
doing this.
inviting me.
You bet. You bet. Open invitation. You'll have to come back again.
Sounds good.
And as always, if you dig what we're doing here, remember to follow the show, write the review. The reviews really do help. You can watch these conversations on YouTube, and I am at Corey S. Nathan on all the socials at Corey S as in Sam Nathan, including Substack, which I'm doing a lot more writing these days.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, yeah. Now go talk some politics and religion with gentleness and respect, and have a great week.